Hello and welcome to another Artis Opus tutorial. More Stormcast from the Dominion box. We've got Anvils of Heldenhammer, matte black. They look great. We've got, feels a bit weird, these are normally my buddy Les's scheme. We've got Celestial Vindicators looking sharp in turquoise. Spent 5 minutes giving that guy an extra set of edge highlights at the end. All of these are super tabletop ready though. And then my take on the classic Stormcast Gold. This looks a little bit older, a little bit more worn, a little bit more battered. I think it looks a little bit more like it's been through a long campaign. Really pleased with all of them. Great end results. And then we spent more time on the blade of this guy and also taking some weathering from his base. Let's jump straight in. Please like, comment and subscribe and hit us up with any suggestions for more Stormcast Eternal color schemes or requests for which Dominion models you would like to see the most next. Any questions as well you've got about the paint scheme, pop below. All of these methods are going to go basically through the same 4-step process. Pretty easy really. So we've got Retributor Armour, followed by Contrast Flesh. We will then be mixing Retributor Armour with Vallejo Game Air Silver for a dry brush, and then we will be doing a spot shade of Gore Grunter Fur, you know, around the rivets, in the recesses, that type of thing. This is a super reliable method for using contrast or washes in general. Essentially, brighter than normal base coat, wash. You can dry brush before the wash or after the wash, it's interchangeable. And then a selective wash in the recesses. A really good way to get stuff looking amazing fast. If you want to use the Retributor Armour spray instead of Retributor Armour paint, you absolutely can. However, because not everyone has the spray available, I'm going to show you how I'm going to get this down. So the idea of this may be a bit strange to some people. Why would I want to mix a non-metallic with a metallic? It just makes it behave better. Also, you can unlock a slightly shinier second coat by doing this, because you're making your first coat less metallic as a percentage, any following coats which are more metallic will look more shiny in comparison. So it's actually quite a good sneaky method to help you make your highlights kind of pop a little bit more and look a bit more shiny. Work that moisture into the dampening pad. Okay, so I'll just pull them together on my palette. Work off any excess. And then we're just going to go for a pretty heavy coat of this. So pretty much all of the model is going to be covered by this, almost as if we were using the spray. What you will get though is the properly recessed areas. So you can see here the step between these two armor plates, that will remain dark. That's not a bad thing whatsoever in my opinion. So heavy dry brush of this all over. You could layer it if you wanted, or you could stipple it. Any of them are absolutely fine. You just want to get this as a coat down all over the model. See a little bit of that Doom Ball evident. I've rushed the dry brushing a little bit. Hopefully I won't get punished for that. Trying to do a speed method for this, you know, a way to get it on the army nice, on the table nice and fast as an army. So here we've got 2 big scoops of Guilliman flesh, and into that I'll put the equivalent of about 1 scoop's worth of medium. That's going on beautifully. Just going for all over. Not pooling too much, but at the same time, we do want enough down there to add some nice nuance to little areas like the bottom of this greave and stuff like that. So take your time with putting this on, make sure that you have enough, but not too much anywhere. And yeah, just a bit of patience with these, I think, is definitely rewarded. Just because you're using something that's associated with a fast technique, you do not need to rush it. Okay, so that's dried. Word of warning, for some reason, these flat, awesome armor sections seem to really encourage pooling. I don't think there's too much I can do about that pooling I've had there, so I'm just going to carefully buff it out. But yeah, just be mindful for your own stuff. Okay, so now we're going to go to our second painting step rather than the washing. Because the silver is so strong, I'm going to be fairly careful on mixing it with the Retributor. We've already got the section on our palette where we mixed up our base coat, so we can compare it to that. And then we do want to take a pretty light approach to this. So I'm going to start on the scales and we're hypertextured again. Looking great, actually. And what I'm hoping for is us being able to buff out any of the issues we had. So even though I rushed this a fair bit, this magical step here should, on any of the raised areas, like we had that little grubby section on the knee and stuff like that, it should pretty much obscure our previous steps. Obviously it's best if you don't rush, but you know, if you are on a time budget and you are trying to go super quick, I think it's worth knowing what techniques are more forgiving than others, especially if you're planning on painting an army worth of troops. See how much more of the gold I'm using than the silver. It does make a big difference how strong the paints are. You can also see the differences in colours on my hand there. There you go, so parts of it like the back of the hand, which had a blob on, which didn't look great. Now, just because you soften the edges of that, that blob becomes extra depth and detail on that section of the armour. And yeah, you can pretty much get away with murder with this. You know, that's looking phenomenal. My base coating wasn't perfect, it was a bit rushed in terms of the dry brushing. But if you did take more time, of course, like this leg here, I think this leg actually had a bit more of the doom ball in the gold, and that's looking really, really good. So that's one of the things you unlock by mixing other colours in with your Retributor armour. Anyway, looking brilliant. Time for the spot details. Do give all of these a really good shake. They won't behave like they're meant to if you're not shaking the hell out of them. So let me show you this on the palette. It's pretty dark, it's pretty deep. It's kind of like chestnut ink, Gore Grunter. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a 0M here, slightly fatter, shorter brush, quite nice for dotting rivets. Remove the excess. I'm going to see how it looks neat. It may be that we should be diluting this slightly. I think we should be diluting this slightly. It's well, it's incredibly strong, basically. This is basically the old chestnut ink by the looks of it. Big blob. There we go. That's looking a little less intimidating and scary now. And this is meant to be a fast paint job, so this is the only really timely step or delicate step. But what we should have, if we get the right mix, just jump right in, is something fairly forgiving that we can use to exaggerate any details that we want. You could dilute this further and put it all over, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I might show you how that looks on a foot. You can also put it down fairly indelicately and then just with a brush with water on it, push it where you'd like it. You probably will result there, you can see I've already done it, in tinting your armor a slightly different, more warm chestnutty color. So if you do wish to avoid that, then the only way to get around it is to you know, go pretty delicately and dot it where you'd like. So it's a completely optional step. You can do it if you want. If you want to use something a bit more forgiving, you can just mix some of your Guilliman flesh with maybe Agrax, or you could use Cryptek Armor Shade Gloss or something like that, or just Cryptek Armor Shade, depending what you were going for. I quite like the warmth you get with this, and it should mean that our guys have you know, some really vibrant tones even in the shades. The details are just going to be finished in kind of base coat wash generic colors. I thought I would show you this though. So this might not work with the first go, but I'm essentially trying to find a way to shade the recesses of this shield lazily, basically. that's what we're going for. So got some Nuln Oil there, just looking how it's behaving on the gold on the palette. That's not quite covering enough, so maybe take some of the Guilliman flesh. So what I'm going to do is basically just drop this in, probably do it twice, and I'm going to drop it in to the recessed areas of the shield. So I'll leave all the embossed sections up on the top. It's a very useful way to be able to do things because of the nature of the wash, you should be able to drag it up to the edges and it'll do the work for you without getting on top of the details, and it means that you can dry brush the entire thing. You know, you're not going to do a selective dry brush or layer some and dry brush the rest. Just a very, very useful technique. So once, already looking pretty good, and I'll just go around again. The nice thing about this is because it's quite a thin layer, by the time I get to the end section, the first section's already dried. There we go, so a really easy way to just knock back that recess section, make the insignia look super shiny, and yeah, really effective. It's not all about the metallic Stormcast, although I do love them in metallics. What I'm going to be doing here is going through a fairly well-known sequence of colours, because this is the typical way that GW would teach you how to do the Celestial Vindicators theme. So Sotek green, Quilly green shade, and then a Temple Guard blue highlight, and they end up being some weird bluey turquoisey hybrid. Really striking scheme, but I think there's a really nice way to do it using dry brushing. We're going to speed that right up now. So undercoat in Sotek, however you like, airbrush, stipple, dry brush, you know, it really doesn't matter. Just make sure that you get coverage all round. If you want to hit it from above, if you are airbrushing and leave it kind of zenithal, that's absolutely fine too. Maybe just start from a darker blue base like Macragge or something like that. So what I'm going to do here is grab a little bit of the Temple Guard blue. We're going to test if that looks too extreme on its own, which it may do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test it on the scales, because I'm going to be changing the colour of those scales. So I think that's going to be absolutely fine. Remove off the excess. This is quite a bit brighter and a slightly different tone, so you don't want to be too heavy-handed with it. I'm basically going to hit up the entire model with this, all over, top to bottom, undersides, top sides. Again, if you're going for something zenithal, you could just do it from the top, but I'm going to do it all over. He's looking a bit weird and pastel-y at the moment. Really is looking fairly strange. Also, I don't think the camera is showing up quite how turquoise these colours are. They are definitely leaning in that direction rather than being, you know, they're not remotely close to a pure blue. So let's grab our Quelia. What I'm going to do is mix this up in a white dish, because that'll give you guys a very clear idea of exactly how it's behaving. So love this colour. So we've got 2 parts Quelia, and then what I'm going to do is I won't be using contrast medium, I'll be using Lahmian medium. Probably a 2-to-1 ratio. I know that was 2 drops, but this brush is a big one. It's a size 4, so a brush head is quite a lot bigger than a drop off the back of it. And what we're going to do is start somewhere fairly forgiving in case this is a really bad idea. So again, scales. Looking pretty good. And then as normal, we're going to go all over the model. So it's really important the amount you leave in these details. You can see I'm putting it on and then sweeping it up. It's one of the joys of using a big brush. Make sure that you pick each separate section, and as you're going through it, coat it from all sides so you don't get any streaking. Make sure that, especially on legs and limbs, that you've got it all around, dart around it fairly quick, and then go in and soak in excess. So that's the way that I'll be treating each separate part as its own separate part, and I'll go start to finish on that section, then move on to the next section. So just to show you once more on the other leg. Catch it with a wash all the way around, up to whatever point I've decided I'm stopping, which is underneath the scales. It's all been coated. Now at this point, you can make sure that nowhere has too much pooling in a way that's not going to look good when it's dried. And also, if we wanted to add a bit more back in, we absolutely can. So we're going to do that all over. First layer is dried. You can see it's starting to do the work that we need it to do. You could not dilute it and do it faster if you needed to, absolutely fine, but I don't think it adds that much more. And actually, I think you're just a bit less likely to do you know, a mistake that needs fixing or is something that annoys you if you approach it with a little bit of medium in there. So I'm going to repeat that step again, exactly the same. I'm aware that I've covered the areas that I'm going to cover with the other stuff, but I want to show you what it would look like all over the model. So let's rock on, and we're just going to duplicate the previous step. So the second coat has dried. Got a little bit of a disparity between his chest plates there. It's just because they are actually slightly different shapes in terms of their volumes, but he's looking pretty tidy. Again, like I said, his turquoise nature isn't quite showing up perfectly on camera here. What we're going to do now is a very careful repeat of our dry brush. So rather than going to a highlight color, because we've washed it down twice and it's got quite a bit darker, we're just going to repeat the same color. Really useful to be able to do that, because obviously it makes keeping things coherent particularly easy. And we're going to be taking an extremely soft approach with this one. This is, you know, almost like this is definitely a buffing. You're powdering the model essentially with the very tiny amount that's going to be hitting. If there are particular areas you wish to hit a little bit more heavily, so if you're looking to do edging, let me show you how I would approach that on his chest. Specifically roll against the details in question from whatever angle is going to help us catch them. You can catch them like that. So we'll do this all over and he should be looking pretty amazing. Then we just got to work out how to take that classical Celestial Vindicator artwork and apply it to a newer one of these Stormcast, because things have changed a little bit. So you're taking a bit of Retributor. A micro dot of our silver. It is very, very potent. Work off this excess. The silver will be the last thing that I do. So it doesn't matter if I go over on this a little bit. And then we're just going to dry brush everything up. So I'll show you this guy going right to the final step. One step like that. Take a little bit more silver. Again, work off excess. Buff him up further, looking amazing. I'll show you guys a quick tip. So I have based all of the details. I wanted to make a burgundy, but I wanted to tie it in really nicely with my paint scheme. So I've mixed Sotek green and Mephiston red. That actually makes a really nice deep color. You can see it going on here, but the special thing I wanted to show you is just how easy it is to highlight some of these Stormcast details, such as the plumes or the details on the handles, which, you know, if you're painting individually look really good, but it does take a long time. So instead of painting them individually, let's take these kind of, the step that is the wrappings on it here, and with a dry brush, yeah, that is an absolute time-saving blessing. Do it on the same thing on the plume. Quickly grab a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright, just to lighten it a tad. I've stepped all the way to Fire Dragon Bright because I want something pastel. It'll stand out a little bit more. Work off our excess, test it, and that'll just make sure that all those lips we pick out. You could go a stage brighter than this if you want, swap brushes or clean this brush off and go with the orange. But yeah, it's just a great way to do what is actually pretty high level detailing extremely fast, just using dry brushing. So an example of the Fire Dragon Bright layer. Go pretty carefully here. It is bright. It's in the name. Brilliant. Looks awesome. The other way to do this, which wouldn't be quite as striking but would look a little bit more dialed back, would be just to base coat it with something really bright, maybe a mixture of these two, and then use a contrast or a shade on it. Another tip with detailing, I've done things in reverse order of how messy they are. So I've done the wraps because they're close to the gold, and we can base coat the gold in exactly the same way as we did this chap. So it's the gold, which is Retributor mixed with Doomball. Base coated that, and then we can move on to a little dry brush of Retributor. I'm going to be using an extra small or a small for access, and I will be taking care not to get it on other areas. If you want to, you could mask this off, but what I'd recommend if you're going for speed is just put your thumb in the way, and that'll stop your strokes from being able to get where they're not meant to go. These models aren't too bad for it. Most of it's on a lip, which is quite forgiving actually. With the dry brushing done, we're going to give it a quick contrast with Gulliman. Test out dilution somewhere first. On smaller details, we might be able to get away with just going in neat, I think. As long as we don't hit things too heavy. I think that's looking fine. You have the option to blackline these by putting Nuln Oil carefully around the edges if you want, but I won't do that yet. And then yeah, just this all over your gold sections. obviously take care of this. This is the old chestnut ink and it is incredibly strong. Show you that on a white background. So I diluted mine quite a lot. It would have looked like that and it now looks like that. Just looking to dot this around rivets, you know, in the deepest recesses. And with enough medium in it, it should kind of handle its own transitions without looking scary. I'm actually going to employ a little trick with Nuln Oil, and I'll show this in a little dish. Nuln Oil isn't too strong. It's definitely not as strong as Gore-Grunter fur, that's for sure. Take a tiny bit of Sotek green. You won't notice the Sotek green. It'll just look like it's been washed with a slightly softer black, but the tint will be there. Could actually have mixed a bit of Coelia green shade in this as well. Either would be absolutely fine. So if you're more comfortable with the idea of only mixing a wash with a wash, or a shade to use the new phrasing, then you can go in that direction. So in terms of the white sections, you can go anywhere you like. I'm just going to mix Rakarth Flesh and Korax White. They've both got amazing coverage, but Rakarth is perhaps slightly too parchmenty or stony. It's got a little bit of brown in it. Obviously that's very bad etiquette, but my Korax White does not get used for being pure white at all. That colour's perfect though. So with these finished, we can carefully, 2 thin coats, 3 thin coats, whatever it takes, we can carefully base coat their panels. You can hit the rivets if you need, not a worry whatsoever, we'll sort that out later. What I'm probably going to do here is use a sneaky strategy to make sure that where my edges meet, despite the fact that things haven't been done perfectly, we'll do something to hide the turquoise. And this is why we don't glue things that we don't need to, because this should be infinitely easier with it not attached to a body. Like I said, keep it thin. A couple of coats is absolutely fine. So as far as the distinguishing details, like between gold and areas like that white goes, if you're anything like me, you might have ended up with a little turquoise rim around the edge. Now how we're going to handle that is just with a very careful and selective Nuln Oil wash. Basically what we want is to just establish a break between one detail and the other using the Nuln Oil, and the Nuln Oil should overpower, but not in a way that is going to make any mistakes for us, that turquoise, and just make it look like we shaded between the details and didn't forget a rim there. Might take a couple of goes. You could always drop a bit of another colour in there, but this is a fantastic technique for separation or for lazy blacklining like that. So hides a multitude of sins, and because it's a wash, it will fade quite nicely. So the other area I wanted to use this on is between the gold and the silver here. There's a recess. This will just help separate the two. And also I will use it up against the silver details just to help separate them from the turquoise. Back on the model for these two wash stages, I'm going to be using Apothecary on the white, on the shoulder pad, and then for the parchment, I think I'm just going to go with Guilliman Flesh, which we've used elsewhere on the model, so should tie in nicely. Okay, so we have number 1 and number 2. The golds have just been done in exactly the same way. The only thing that's been changed is the gold and silver mix that was dry brushed over this one has really pulled it up, and the recessed dot was used more widely on the second one. So this one's turned out more gold, more like a bronzy gold, and this one's turned out more of a true gold. So I want to do Anvils of Heldenhammer next. Let me grab my study material first. this one. So we've got our target here. It looks like it's a pretty goldy gold here, but then this one unhelpfully is much deeper. So God knows. I am gonna just pick whichever gold I think would look best against a black background. So let's hold these next to each other. This is kind of a more old goldy. I think there's normal. This one is slightly better, but I think we will just highlight it up a bit higher. So this is Chaos Black undercoat. We want to kind of keep that pristine, so you can do that two ways. You can keep your painting very neat and just hit the outside areas, or you can put some stuff over it so that if you do make a mistake with a gold, you can go back and fix it, because obviously you can't selectively respray bits with Chaos Black. So we are going to be taking this up a tiny bit with highlights, but not very far. So we'll take it up and then we'll knock it back down, and then we'll do the gold. So we've grabbed Eshin Grey and Abaddon Black. They're on a palette. Abaddon Black is not the strongest black, and as a result that makes it the perfect black for this task. It's quite a forgiving one to work with. It's not got crazy coverage. It's not got very good coverage at all actually, but that's perfect for our purposes here. Let's take a little bit of the black. And basically here we just want to make a very, very dark grey. I'm making careful to not overly saturate my brush, just taking from the very, very edge. Take it elsewhere. It's a little bit watery. And as ever, let's test it somewhere that won't matter. So the scales. Now, even if this doesn't look like it's doing much, you know, if it's really, really thin, soft touch layer, that's absolutely fine, because we just need to get something down on this black that is not Chaos Black. So we'll hit this up all over, and even if it looks like we're just making it a tiny shade, slightly more gray, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so it's pretty easy. Next step, we just have a little bit more gray involved. So think of this as grey with a spot of the black. Obviously the end goal of this is to have something that people would still regard as black, which is quite hard, because where do you go to on the edges, how do you highlight it, etc. Something that definitely people struggle with quite regularly with this type of scheme. So again, we'll test here. Probably a little bit more than that. And keep it fairly dilute with the dampening pad. Put it here so you can see what type of color I'm using. Now it's very easy to think that you don't need to hit everywhere when you're doing something like this, but we are laying, albeit a quick foundation, but it is an important one, so make sure you hit everywhere again. Because when we hit it with a black wash, we really want to make sure that this works. The shield will probably end up looking amazing because it's got amazing texture on it anyway. So the reason why you can't see this so easily is because we already put down the previous layer, so even though the previous layer wasn't too noticeable, to making the transition into this softer. I pretty much regard this as the same step rather than two different steps, because you just roll straight from one into the other. And then what we're going to do next, now you can pick any lighter grey you like, so you have the option for Fenrisian if you want a blue tint, you know, Dawnstone if you want something that, you know, is a little bit more warm. Any of this type of pastel-y grey will absolutely do. You've got Celestia Grey, even though that's a base. You know, plenty of choice there. You could just mix a bit of blue horror in with your grey. Anything like that is absolutely fine. I'm going to go with this one for a little bit of Fenrisian. We're going to be pretty careful with it. Scales. Okay, we're looking right. So what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be very carefully buffing it but specifically I'm going to be trying to catch every edge on the model. So this isn't necessarily for the volumes or hitting large flat sections. This is to drag against every edge we have. So if you've got any edges, make sure you're hitting them at 90 degrees and do that all over the miniature. With the dry brush done, we're not looking too bad. It's quite hard to make this type of stuff over black look, you know, a flat black at that, like Chaos Black, look perfect, but the next step should really play back. You can see I've already tested it here on the loincloth. We're just going to go with naked Nuln Oil, not diluted. In my case, you can if you wish though, and if you want to add any other hints of other colors, you know, you want to put Coelio green shade in there, the shade, or you want to drop the contrasts, a Kellyan green, or a tiny bit of Leviathan blue, or even a little bit of Talisar blue or something like that in there, then you absolutely can. Quite interesting to tint black in different ways, I think. So we've got a Nuln Oil and we're just going to pop that all over. Might require 2 steps, but it's absolutely fine if it does. So all of this all over exactly the same way as normal. This is quite forgiving because you're putting a black wash down on something you want to end up being black, but still, you know, don't let it pull overly anywhere, and try and keep it to a decent quality. Don't rush too much, it'll go pretty fast anyway. That wash is just done pretty much what we would have expected. Only one stage of it, and I think that's pretty good. We won't know how black it looks until we put it next to the gold, so that'll be the next step. I, however, am going to do a completely optional step. You can do this with any matte varnish you've got. I've got Green Stuff World's extra matte varnish. It is a bit mental. It's very, very matte, but I think against the shiny stuff, that's going to look super interesting. And I do think matte black is underused on models. So you can do this with brush, thin down with water, or you can do it with airbrush, thin down with thinner. Either way is absolutely fine. We are fully base coated. That's the mix of these two that we used previously, of course. The matte varnish is super matte and it will make things look more grey than they did. So, you know, you could put 2 washes of Nuln Oil there underneath that, or use less of the other stages. I'm okay with this though. I just wanted it to look super, super, super matte, and I think that's absolutely fine. The other thing you could do is put a really sharp edge highlight on there, and it'd actually look pretty tidy, I think. Really nice. Anyway, let's rock on with our wash. So again, we're going to be using Guilliman Flesh, and then we have the option to spot with Gore Grunter. And we've got another stage of dry brushing to go as well. So I think what I'll do is, sequencing wise for this one, I will do the dry brush prior to the wash. You could do either though. The reason for doing the dry brush prior to this wash is I want to pull it up a little bit brighter and then knock the entire thing back. So rather than just, you know, hitting it with some sharp highlights, I'm going to hit like a medium level dry brush, so covering a fair bit of it, and then we'll knock all of that back with the wash, and that should keep it in quite a nice spectrum. So we use the same brush for all of our grey. You can actually see that as we worked our way through it, because we're trying to remove paint from the bristles, we've ended up with them cleaner than we started with almost, which is pretty good. Anyway, we've got our silver and our gold here on the palette. You could put some of the Doom Bolt in if you wanted. I don't wish to at this stage. That would definitely keep it more in the bronzy spectrum. We're going for a gold here though, and we're not going for white gold, we're going just for a slightly lighter gold. So probably about 3 parts Retributor to 1 part silver. The silver is very strong though, so if you're using another silver, probably just go 50-50 and you'll be absolutely fine. And the most important thing here is to be mindful of your black section. So when I'm dry brushing, I'm going to use a very fancy masking strategy, which involves putting my thumb in the way. You could use tape or something if you wished. For me though, this is absolutely fine. So this all over every single area. You know, we're not trying to do it angled or anything. Do try and make sure that you hit edges like this. But we do want every area of that to be covered, and it'll really work wonders for just how shiny this looks. Now, if there was ever a time and a place for Baby D, it's the trim around this. I've been using a small, but I'm going to jump to the extra small. Still important to get that mix right. You can get away with having it a little bit brighter here. It's a smaller area, and also to a certain degree, the less time you spend here, the less time there's a chance of making a mistake. So I think for that reason, you can actually get away with going a fair bit brighter, or in this case, more silver. We do have a wash to knock it back. I'm going to paint the head at the very end because I'm bracing the model with it when I hold it. Perfect. Just good to have a smaller tool for the job. Now when you have done that, if you get any flecks appearing elsewhere on the model, grab yourself a clean brush, or at least a dry one, and you should just be able to dust them off. As far as the tabletop ready version of these guys goes, we are done. Trying to juggle them all, let's get them together. So this guy looks super cool. You know, obviously really nice to have a opportunity for a bit of a poppy color in there. This is a bit more tealy greeny in real life. The camera's just not getting to pick up on the subtlety. There doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it. He does look lovely though. Looks lovely either way, looks cool on camera, but he's just slightly more green than that. Obviously, there's no more than 4 steps on any part of this, because the armor, we've used the same technique that we used on this armor. It's just we've not done the final step with as much gold in it. So pretty easy there. This one looks really, really solid as well. Just kind of classic-y Stormcast, although I do like the idea of just using contrast several times to knock back the shades, and it's very efficient. I cannot recommend this enough. Possibly worth doing that on the shoulder pads. And then we've got our matte black dude. That stage obviously made a really big difference on him. Very, very, very distinctive. What I'd like to do now is look at each of these, and I'm going to make one change or tweak or enhancement on them that I think would make the biggest difference. I think this is a really interesting exercise to go through. So if I were doing these for a gaming army, what would be the one thing I would spend, 10 little minutes on, or whatever it is, to make the biggest difference to the model? So in this one, I believe it'd just be a quick edge highlight. Lends itself really nicely on coloured armour, and these do have very distinctive panels and also quite a lot of available edges that mean that, it's not so hard. So that'll be that for him. This one here, I think it's got to be trying out giving him a power sword, a glowy weapon of some type. The silver does look really cool and absolutely fine, but I think glowing eyes, glowing gem, and glowing sword would be cool on him. Could also do blood effects, which would show up very, very well on the matte black surface. Other option, close second, would be to chip around the edges there, or whether that was with the grey or with the silver, I think it looked really good. Not sure about this lady actually. I think this is a really solid one overall. Yeah, I'm gonna have to have a think about that. But for those two, let's rock on and give them a little bit of an enhancement and a pickup. That blue really, really makes that guy pop. Unsurprising really, given that it's not a hugely colourful model overall. I've actually just ripped this off. You may recognise this base. That's been grabbed from our recent metallic ultramarine, and I've given it exactly the same treatment as the ultramarine got, just washing some Doomball into the recesses. I mixed Doomball and Scrag to make it a bit lighter on this guy. Could use pigments though, so I've just put that in, and then I've removed excess with a cotton bud just by rolling it against it. Really fast way to make sure that it's just in the very recesses, because I didn't want to cover too much of the lovely matte black armour. That is an absolute success. As an army, that would look phenomenal. Edging on a man obviously makes a big difference. If you are going to do it on any of them, then I think the coloured armour plates are really a good way to do it. Perhaps some chipping on this would look really good, or the weathering would equally look amazing. I think it looks amazing on everything. I just wanted to show it on one of them. And then in the end, we didn't end up changing anything on this guy because I thought that the weathering would be better to show on the other one. But as I've said, would work equally well on either of them. here they are again. Very pleased with all of these. You know, I think the Stormcast models, especially the ones with the spears, I've forgotten these guys' names, but they look very martial. They've got very striking shields. It's quite easy to get a high quality job on them. This one really stands out. Matte black is not seen enough in gaming in general, and I think it's a really good way to stand out. If you're a brave Tamiya clear red, or you know, some blood effects or something like that would look amazing on this. Let me know which one's your favorite. Let me know which one you would like to see us cover next. Do you want us to, you know, dry brush up Ynestra's wings, or tackle the big, whatever the beast is called that the goblin dude is on, the big worm wolf thing? Do let us know. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you are subscribed, hit that little bell notification to be notified for more Dominion content, because we have a veritable onslaught of it planned.